All right, let's talk about what just happened in New York City. We just witnessed one of the biggest political upsets maybe ever. An absolute underdog, pulling at less than 1%, just took down a political giant to become the next mayor. So the big question is, how on earth did he pull it off? Today, we're going to break it all down for you.
I mean, just look at these numbers. The early polls, they weren't just bad, they were basically a joke. You had Zoran Mamdani, who most people had never even heard of, sitting at less than 1%. And who is he up against? Andrew Cuomo, a former governor, a name everyone in New York knows. It was the definition of David versus Goliath, and let's be real, nobody, and I mean nobody, was putting their money on David here.
So how did this happen? How does a virtual unknown topple a political dynasty in the biggest city in America? Well, that's exactly what we're about to get into.
Okay, so it turns out there wasn't just one magic bullet. It was this incredible combination of two things working together perfectly. A message that really truly hit home for regular New Yorkers, and a massive grassroots movement that made sure everyone heard it. It all started with what he talked about. While a lot of other candidates were talking in, these vague political terms, Mamdani was laser-focused on the one thing that keeps most New Yorkers up at night: the insane cost of living. He got that for millions of people. This isn't some abstract policy debate. It's about paying rent, buying groceries. It's personal.
And he didn't just talk about the problem. He came with receipts. I mean, look at this agenda. He was talking about rent freezes for stabilized apartments, free city buses, city-run grocery stores to bring down prices, universal childcare, and a massive plan for 200,000 new affordable housing units. These weren't little tweaks around the edges. These were big, bold ideas that people could actually picture making a difference in their lives.
And by doing all this, by hammering on economic justice, he drew a really clear line in the sand. The choice for voters became super simple. Do you want more of the same from the establishment, or do you want a new kind of leader who's actually ready to go to bat for you on the cost of living?
So the message was obviously powerful, but who was listening? Well, this is where the numbers get really interesting because they show us that a whole new kind of electorate showed up.
Let's start with the sheer scale of it all. Over 2 million ballots were cast. Just let that sink in. This wasn't a squeaker. This was a victory fueled by a massive, undeniable wave of people showing up to vote.
And to put that number in perspective, take a look at this chart. You can see the turnout from past elections, and then you see 2025. It's a huge jump. In fact, it's the highest voter turnout in a New York City mayoral race since 1969. Something was definitely different this time around.
So, who were all these new voters? The data paints a very clear picture. Mamdani built a powerful coalition of renters, voters under 45, working-class folks, and immigrant communities. Think about it. These are the exact groups of people most affected by the cost of living crisis. His message didn't just land, it mobilized them.
Okay, so you've got the message, you've got the voters, but you still need the engine to connect the two. And that's where the Mamdani campaign built something truly special, an absolutely unprecedented grassroots machine.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Seasoned political analysts are calling it the greatest field operation by any political campaign in the city's history. This wasn't just about enthusiasm. It was a strategic, people-powered engine designed to go head-to-head with the big money and name recognition of the establishment.
Just try to wrap your head around this number. More than 100,000 volunteers. 100,000 people who knocked on doors. This campaign wasn't dreamed up in some fancy downtown office. No, it was built block by block, neighbor by neighbor across all 5 boroughs.
And their strategy, while it sounds simple, was just executed flawlessly. It was all about old-school, relentless door-knocking. It was about creating high-energy events that pulled new people into the movement. They made a real point to go to communities that politicians usually just fly over. And crucially, they focused on mobilizing people who don't normally vote.
So, message plus movement equals a historic win. Got it? But, winning the election is just the beginning. Now comes the hard part, governing. So what does this mandate for change really mean for the future of New York City?
Before we even get to the policy, let's just pause and recognize how historic this is. New York City now has its first ever Muslim mayor, its first South Asian mayor, and one of the youngest mayors in its history. This isn't just a political win, it's a huge moment for the city and a massive victory for the progressive movement nationally.
So looking ahead, you really have two competing narratives. On one hand, you have the mandate.
Supporters will tell you he successfully tapped into the real, everyday economic struggles of New Yorkers and brought a whole new generation into politics. On the other hand, you have the obstacles. Critics are already lining up to question whether the city can actually afford his proposals and if his agenda is even politically possible.
And that first question is probably the biggest one. Can New York City actually afford all this? We're talking about free public transit, universal childcare, huge investments in housing. That's a bill that runs into the billions. Where does that money come from?
Beyond the price tag, there are political and structural hurdles. The mayor of New York doesn't have unlimited power. He's going to have to deal with the state government in Albany, navigate a massive city bureaucracy, and work within some very real budget constraints. As they say, campaigning is easy, governing is hard.
Which really brings us to the final question. Mamdani's win felt like a political earthquake, for sure. But was it a fluke? A one-time thing that happened because of a unique candidate meeting a perfect storm of voter anxiety? Or is this the beginning of something bigger? The start of a truly new progressive era for New York? The answer to that is what we'll all be watching.